Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today I'll be talking about a fairly well-known animated film if you're into animation. But if you're not too into animation, this one's gonna seem like it's a hidden gem. And it kind of is, really. See, even I wasn't really too aware of this. I mean, I'd seen maybe some stills of this in the past, but it wasn't until fairly recently, about a week before I started doing this episode, that I even learned of the existence of this movie. It's often cited as the movie that has inspired various animated features or shows, even a video game in terms of its design. The Japanese animated feature, The Little Prince and the Eight-Headed Dragon. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. Now back to the show. The Little Prince and the Eight-Headed Dragon is a Japanese animated feature from the 60s. Basically, it's a fairy tale-like movie. I'm not sure if it's based on any actual fairy tales from Japan or myths, but for the most part, it's pretty much like, here's this little prince named Susano who is told that his mother has passed away. Though not exactly in that way. He's just told that his mother has gone away. Despite being told that he can't reach his mother, he decides to journey off and find where she's at. Now, I don't know how much was changed in the English language version. The version I saw was the English dub, which, overall was very, very well done. Did have some pretty awkward voice work in it, but that's to be expected with a dub, especially for something from so long ago that clearly hasn't been given much care, and I'll get into that as we go into this, but that's generally what the movie is about. It is this little prince who goes off to find where his mother is at. He's told it's heaven, but doesn't really know how to get there, so he tries to get the help of his brother and his sister, who both ruled their own lands, all while encountering various evil characters. Essentially, the whole movie is just a series of vignettes, all tied together by this one ongoing storyline, and eventually you get to the Eight-Headed Dragon, which is the final portion of the movie. That's pretty much all it is. Now, obviously, like I said before, this has been used as the inspiration for a lot of other stuff, and you can automatically tell once you see it, because it's mostly in the art style. It's a very nice, simple art style. It's very nice to look at. It's not your standard anime art style, which isn't bad. It is nice. It is a very good-looking movie. The animation just it really looks like this unique thing. But, and this is a big but, once you know what it's inspired, you will automatically be like, okay, yeah, I see it. Like, one of the things that it was cited as an inspiration for was for getting Tartakovsky's Samurai Jack. You can automatically see it once you see the art style, especially because there's a lot of action in this. Apparently this was used as the inspiration for a lot of Cartoon Saloon stuff. They're the guys, pretty much the company behind like Secret of Kells, Wolfwalkers, lots of good movies. Served as the inspiration for the art style for this Netflix movie. I don't think I've talked about it on here before, and it really should be seen if you haven't seen it, called The Willoughbys. The one that I feel like most directly was inspired by it. It was apparently the inspiration for the art style behind the Wind Waker, the Legend of Zelda video game, and yeah, you can see it. Toon Link looks like Susano. Obviously, this has been around for a good long while, yet you don't hear too many people talk about it, and it's a shame. It's because it's mostly that the US, for whatever reason, has never given this movie its proper love. And of course, it got dubbed, released here, all fine and dandy. But when it came to doing like more modern releases, they haven't given it the same treatment that they would have for a lot of other classic movies. I'm assuming largely it's because it's a foreign film, but that's still disappointing. for such a movie that is technically a big landmark movie in many regards. Looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I can automatically see what this movie did for the animation community, and yet the fact that me, someone who's really into animation, was pretty much unaware of this movie's even like its entire existence until fairly recently is disappointing. I mean, sure, I'm not expecting to know everything about animation, but for something like this that has mattered in a lot of ways to just be a thing, I just found out about it. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Apparently, there's at most maybe one physical release that's been out there for the U.S. In a bundled package, and I doubt you could even find it anymore, and two, it's still not in the proper way to see it. At the very least, if you have non-regional DVD players or Blu-ray players, I'm not sure if Blu-ray players have a region coded. I believe so. You can find a Japanese one more easily, but I don't know. It just feels like, why shouldn't this get more respect? I mean, the animation community goes out of its way to try to bring out like the best for the Miyazaki movies, Studio Ghibli in general, and whatnot. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's just a budget thing, maybe it's just no one has the money to do it. But I'm like, it'd be nice to see if one of these big animation studios would try to offer a hand to this, or not really just this, but a lot of animation from outside the U.S. to get their proper love in the U.S. because there's a lot of these things that if they're not being supported by any of those big studios, you'll never see them around here, and you'll never see anything properly done for them. And that's I think that's a real shame, and especially when you have something as good as this. And just to be clear, this movie is a very nice movie. I don't think I love it as much as I love the designs of it. Like, as a movie itself, it's pretty okay. It's fine. It's fun. Seeing Susano, the little prince, constantly beat up everything, getting into fights with pretty much everyone. Boy even gets, he gets into a fight with a tiger. He gets into a fight with a fire god. Fights a dragon. He fights everything in this movie. It's to the point that even when he's crying, he is destroying his own land. So it is very funny. As a movie itself, I don't think it's as great as the art style, which is fine. Sometimes what makes a movie great isn't just one specific thing. Like, there is something that stands out about it so much that whether it's the story is not so good or the characters aren't so good or whatever, that makes it all the more worth it, and it makes sense why it matters so much. Even if normally for a lot of movies, they have to try hard at every single area. There are just some movies that are so good in one area that it doesn't even matter for the rest. I feel like this is kind of one of those where it's like, again, the movie itself is fine. I believe I saw someone compare it kind of to Mary Blair's art style. She worked for Disney. If you look her up, you'll automatically know what she's done. Most people associate her work with It's a Small World, which kind of lame that they never did a full movie in her art style. Then again, that's not surprising given how Disney has tried to rarely dip their toes outside of a set style. Regardless, this movie is kind of reminiscent of that style if you've seen it. It's still its own thing, and yeah, it's just a beautiful looking movie where even if the movie wasn't as good as it was, like if it was just a terrible movie, I would still recommend to watch it just for the art style. But at the very least, you still get a decent movie out of it. So that's all the more worth it. And again, this is coming from a version that apparently is not even properly presented. I mean, I'm not sure if the movie was actually in a widescreen. The version I saw was just a full screen, and apparently that's the only version that's been around for the US. Apparently it is slightly different. Again, I'm not sure if it was actually ever at the widescreen, but I mean, even if it's just at the full screen, it's still a really stunning thing to watch. And it's definitely something that I'd say, like, yeah, if you're in the animation community, you owe it to yourself to watch it. Like, even if you don't want to emulate this style, it's just nice to see. I mean, to be honest, it's nice to see a Japanese animated feature that looks so different from their own work. And not to trash the anime style, but I just feel like there's so many um, anime projects that use that similar art style that it just feels like, I mean, it's nice, don't get me wrong, but if there is one thing that I prefer about Western animation is that there is much more variety on how things look. I know some anime fans are probably going to crucify me for that, but hey, you know what? I'm all the more willing to take it. Now, if it feels like I'm gushing more about the art style than about the film, I mean, again, it's just that it's not most interesting story around. And again, it's not even bad. It's just that it is a fairy tale. It very much feels like something that would have come out of Disney if Disney was, more willing to just let people do their own thing in terms of the art style. But yeah, it is very much on that vein. It's the kind of story that you would read to your kid during bedtime, maybe read it in parts, because you pretty much get that whole thing where it starts and stops. Like you got your first part where it's like, okay, we are introduced to the little prince. He's strong and brave and kind, but also really loves to fight because he starts beating up a tiger for beating up the, one of his little rabbit friends, which is his main sidekick throughout the movie. And then the tiger, even after begging for forgiveness and deciding to knock off his ways, the little prince is still beating his ass. And then, of course, he gets the bad news that his mom has passed away, or left for heaven, and he sets off on an adventure. Then you get like, okay, well, here's a story where he finds the brother and beats his people, but the brother is like, okay, look, I can't really help you, but I'll give you this thing that'll help you when you get in trouble. Okay, next story. Okay, now we're introduced to the second sidekick of the group, which is this larger guy who is part of this village that has been dried out because it's under the watch of this like fire god who's way too hot that no water's coming through and whatnot. It's like, okay, well, let's beat the fire god, and it turns out that item my brother gave me is actually this ice beam thing, and now we go off on another adventure with the big guy so he can help find a better land for his people, and the story just continues on that way. It's very much just little stories. I do like the whole thing with the item. I wonder if that kind of inspired Legend of Zelda or just video games, like adventure video games in general, because it really does feel like, okay, look, we got this one thing. It's kind of like a key to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the movie follows that whole thing. There is a lot of things where it's like, okay, well, this is gonna come back later on as an item that he'll be using. Or a thing. He eventually gets a horse that flies, which is pretty cool, and fights the eight-headed dragon, and it's all just a matter of like, okay, well, we gotta strategize on this. We're gonna get the eight-headed dragon wasted with some wine, take off its head one by one. And he's mostly just doing this just because there's a girl that his area at that point that is under the threat of the eight-headed dragon, and she pretty much reminds him of his mom. Even the ending of this movie, like, switch spoiler alert, whatever, is kind of yeah, this is definitely a fairy tale where pretty much the mom finally appears and she tells him like, look, you haven't reached me yet, but I'll tell you this much: if you continue doing good things throughout your life, you will eventually find the land I'm in. So essentially, she's just telling him, hey, be a good boy and you're gonna go to heaven like I did. And that's pretty much the end of it. It's not like we're actually gonna see, like, okay, him actually reaching the gates of heaven and dragging his mother out of there, eventually landing in her in hell or something. But it's very much just as very simple, just simple film, and that's not bad. Again, there's charm in that. I do like a lot of the classic Disney films just because of how simple they were and how much just the characters and the vibes just kept you on board. That's kind of like what this is. even if the movie itself isn't particularly the greatest thing, I still like the vibe of it. I still would enjoy it even if the art style wasn't this really excellent art style that, yeah, it's pretty inspirational to so many works. I still enjoy it. I mean, it's the same reason why I enjoyed. Um, it's the same reason why I enjoyed the animated Super Mario Bros. Movie, because it was an animated movie that was like, okay, we're gonna have fun characters. We have a simple premise. We're just gonna let the characters interact, and that premise carry it. And I can't complain. It is exactly what the movie needs to be, and that's more important sometimes than adding in a bunch of heavier story beats or trying to make something more complex for the sake of trying to look important and big. Sometimes that's not necessary, and realistically, this movie feels more important the way it is than it would have if they tried making it all into a much bigger, grander story with more complex details. Sometimes simple is fine, and sometimes it's better than than doing something that's deep. I don't know what to tell you. And for the most part, The Little Prince and the Eight-Headed Dragon, it's again just this wonderful looking feature. So regardless of what it doesn't do to a lot of artists out there, I imagine that it does everything they needed it. I don't know. I certainly, kind of want to draw like this. I wish I could draw like this. Just feel like, it's such a beautiful thing. And, for as much as I've seen it in other works, I still don't see it enough. Just something more abstract, something more simple that conveys a lot despite being, I don't want to say little, but, basically, like, it doesn't look as if it's detailed. Like, it's the kind of thing that a more critical person would probably say, looks like a little kid's drawing. And then when you actually attempt it, you realize, like, oh no, this is much more complex. It's just that, I don't know. There's beauty in the simplicity of these things. It definitely feels like something that once you see, like, just how it's done, it'll probably infuriate certain people, just because it's like, it's so much more hard work for something that at first lacks, to just a person's eye, lacks a lot of detail, and yet all that detail that's missing is actually in and of itself a lot of detail. As weird as that sounds, I don't know. I probably am going on circles, and that's because, again, it's the art style that makes this movie. And, there's no shame in that. There's a lot of movies that don't even have that much going for them. So my final messages are, please, whether it's the studio behind this or just some other animation studio that cares about animation, find some way to bring this more love in the Western world. Whether it's just re-releasing it in official formats, giving it a big theatrical re-release, or just anything. Something to show that this movie exists to people who aren't even aware that it does, I think would be great. Even if the story itself is not earth-shattering, it doesn't really need to be. It's still just a fine, fun movie with the art style making it what it is. I recommend watching it, especially if you're into animation. If you're not into animation, you might still be able to enjoy it, but I would probably say watch it with a kid. I don't know how entertaining this movie will be if you're not really into animation and you're not too big on, simple fairy tales. If you're not, you might want to avoid it. I would still recommend watching it, though, just because it is a lovely film. But again, not everyone's gonna have that interest. So if you're at least curious based on what I'm telling you, but not sold, maybe watch it with a kid. Your kid might enjoy it more than you, and sometimes that's fine. at the very least, you're expanding your palette while giving someone else the chance to encounter something that they normally wouldn't have because you weren't too into it. Regardless, I recommend it. It's fun. It's beautiful. I'm just glad that I found out that this thing exists. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
Stop it! Don't cry!
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like and comment, ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.